like to call the meeting of the Texarkana, Arkansas Board of Directors to order. At this time, we'll have a roll call.
Director Harris.
Here.
Director Hollibush.
Here.
Director Odom is absent. Director Minor.
Here.
Director Peavy.
Here.
Assistant Mayor Teeters.
Here.
Mayor Brown.
Here. Okay, at this time, we'll stand. We'll have the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance given by Director Stephen Hollibush.
Lord, thank you for the incredible opportunity to come here and serve the people of this community. God, we pray that you would be with us as we conduct the business of the city. Lord, give us wisdom and give us guidance as we make decisions that concern these citizens. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we have a couple of service awards to give out. I think one of our, is Gary East here? Gary, if you'll come forward. Gary is with the Texas Arkansas Police Department and works at their board. 10 years of service. We'll recognize him for tonight. So we appreciate it very much. And Jeffrey Tanner will be honored tonight for 25 years of service with the fire department. I think we made it back. Jenna Dowell from police department is, how many years does she have been here? 10 years. So we'll have those and we'll get those to them here at a later date. So moving right along to our consent agenda. Tonight on the consent agenda, item number 2 is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting on July the 15th and the call meeting on July 24th. Item number 3, adopt a resolution authorizing city manager into a construction contract with Tatum Excavating. And item number 4 is to adopt a resolution authorizing city manager into contracts with various suppliers for chemicals for the water treatment and for the use of Wright Patman Water Treatment Plant and Millwood Water Treatment Plant. So do I hear a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Second. Have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Consent agenda passes. If it's the board's desire, I was speaking with the city attorney about the possibility of, since we have 2 ordinances to consider tonight of great importance. We do have 2 items on the agenda, and we have some out-of-town people here that represent those, the airport and naturally the request for the municipal approval for the private club. If it's permissible with the board, we could jump down and consider item number 7 and item number 8, and then go back to item number 5 and number 6. Does anyone have any issues or concerns with that? Okay. At this time, then we'll move on to item number 7, which is to consider the following action concerning the proposed revenue notes for the Texarkana Airport Authority, to conduct a public hearing to hear the citizens' concern regarding the proposed revenue notes, to adopt an ordinance authorizing the Texarkana Airport Authority to borrow funds on a short-term basis, delegating certain powers under the Municipal Airport Act, and authorize one or more series of airport revenue notes. So Airport Director Mark Mellinger and Attorney Jim Fowler with the Rose Law Firm. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'm Jim Fowler with the Rose Law Firm. Are we opening the public hearing at this point?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Well, then, obviously, we're here to speak on behalf of the airport and the issuance of the airport revenue notes. I'll point out in the ordinance before you that the revenue notes that are going to be issued are for the purpose of providing short-term interim financing for projects for which the airport is receiving grants from the federal and state government. The way the timing of those grants work are that the federal grants come in as the costs are incurred. The state grant reimburses the airport for a 10% requirement the airport is required under the federal grant program at the end of the project. So there's a cash flow gap in there, and so they would borrow against these lines of credit during that interim and be repaid from the state grant, the 10% as it comes in. The obligations are obligations of from the airport revenue only, and are not obligations of either the cities of Texarkana, Arkansas, or Texarkana, Texas. And Mark, if we may, would like to describe some of the projects going forward that we have.
Some of you have probably seen this before, but this is our overall chart for the development of the airport. And our first project will be the south taxiway that goes all the way to the end of runway 4, and it starts about right there. We just received a grant for that. Congressman Westerman called me the other day and said we had received that grant. That'll be about a $7 million project going down through there like that. And then this area here will be a separate project. It's about $4 million to complete that part of the taxiway. We had to do the taxiways because there was no way to get into the ramp area for the new terminal building. The new terminal building is this building right here. Its total cost is about $15 million, but we're going to do it in phases. And starting next year will be phase 1. That's going to be about $3.5 million, and then on the subsequent years on down. 2021 is about $6.5 million. Then about 2.2 million and 3.4 million, and should have completion in 2023. That's for the building anyway. We'll try to speed it up the best we can. There's a possibility we might be able to do this section with this section this fiscal year, and that would be very beneficial. We could get good bid prices on that if we need to do that. So. And then, of course, there's the ramp and the building and the parking lot and the road into the loop drive around the parking lot. These items on the air side is what we call it. The taxiway, the ramp, the building are all eligible for federal funding, FAA funding. It's a 90% grant, and like Jim was saying, we have to match that with 10% of local money. We can only do that by getting these lines of credit. At the end of the project, and only at the end, is when we get money back from the state of Arkansas, the Arkansas Department of Aeronautics, for that 10% match. But these projects go along, I mean, it could be, one of them is going to be probably 18 months, and so we have to cash flow that money, and the contractor needs to be paid as we go along. So that's why we have to have the lines of credit.
With that, the ordinance calls for parameters that they'll not have more than $3 million worth of this interim financing outstanding at any one time, have a maximum true interest cost of not to exceed 6%, and that no note issued under this will have a maturity of longer than 5 years. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hang on.
Go ahead.
What's the going interest rate now?
The going what?
What is the going interest rate now?
What was it? Shannon, what was the interest rate that we already had? 4%.
The reason I asked if you say 6%, so that's what I'm.
That's just that's to provide a maximum parameter in case rates go up over time. It should be within that 6%.
Yeah, right now it will be 4% though.
Mark, I'm just thrilled to hear that that grant money came through for the $7 million. I think it's just showing how that this can continue to progress and to eventually this become reality. Because every time I get stuck at that railroad crossing, I just think I'm just not a very patient person, and I'm sure other people aren't either. And I think this will be a great asset for Texarkana.
Yep, I agree. There's no railroad crossings over here, so we'll take care of that problem.
Is
And you've
there,
already, sorry, the Texas side, of course, I know based on the population, depending on how much each person and each, each side will be, I mean, I know Texas side has already promised dollars, even before the Arkansas side did. So I would hate to think that we would be holding that up in any way, shape, or form, because I know the Texas side has already put up quite a bit of money for this. And I think Ready is 100% behind this. And
That's correct.
so, thank you very much, appreciate it.
before closing the public hearing, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on, pertaining to the airport agenda item? Okay. Then we'll declare the public hearing closed. I will say that I don't think I've ever had the authority to sign a note for $3 million and never have to worry paying it back, so I'll be glad to do that.
Don't get used to it.
I wish we could personally find some kind of money like that somewhere, so, all
We
right.
just don't want to pay 6%.
No, I don't want to pay 6%.
Hopefully not.
Okay, so public hearing is closed. We'll move on to the ordinance, and I'll have a motion to read the ordinance. We're just going to read it in the first reading.
I move that it's read in abbreviated form.
Okay, so we have a motion to read the ordinance in its abbreviated form. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, would you call the roll, Heather?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibush,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
An ordinance authorizing the Texarkana Airport Authority to borrow funds on a short-term basis, delegating certain powers under the Municipal Airports Act to the Texarkana, to the Texarkana Airport Authority, authorizing the issuance of one or more series of airport revenue notes, prescribing other matters pertaining thereto, and declaring an emergency.
The ordinance has been read on its first reading. Do I hear a motion to have the ordinance read tonight on its second
I
reading?
move that we further suspend the rules and place the ordinance on the second read.
In abbreviated form.
Still, well, I mean, once you start
Right,
reading.
yeah.
So we have a motion to have it read tonight in its second reading, its abbreviated form.
Second.
There's a second. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibush,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
An ordinance authorizing the Texarkana Airport Authority to borrow funds on a short-term basis, delegating certain powers under the Municipal Airports Act to the Texarkana Airport Authority, authorizing the issuance of one or more series of airport revenue notes, prescribing other matters pertaining thereto, and declaring an emergency.
I move that the rules further suspend and place the ordinance on the third and final reading.
Second. I have a motion and a second to have the ordinance read on its third and final reading. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibush,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
An ordinance authorizing the Texarkana Airport Authority to borrow funds on a short-term basis, delegating certain powers under the Municipal Airports Act to the Texarkana Airport Authority, authorizing the issuance of one or more series of airport revenue notes, prescribing other matters pertaining thereto, and declaring an emergency.
So the ordinance has been read in its third and final reading. Do I hear a motion to adopt?
Move for adoption.
Or second?
Second.
So I have a motion to adopt in a second. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibush,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes. So the ordinance has been adopted. This ordinance also has asked for an emergency clause. Do I hear a motion to enact an emergency clause?
So moved.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to enact the emergency clause. Could you call the roll?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibush,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes. So the emergency clause is approved. All right, moving right along, we'll again jump over to item number 8, which is to adopt an ordinance granting the request for a prerequisite municipal approval of a private club application for the Mexican restaurant at Crossroads Business Park. I believe Josh Potter has that.
Mr. Mayor, I'm Jake Potter. I'm the other one.
Oh, did I say Josh?
You did.
You look like Jay. You look like Josh. And usually Josh represents all these.
Right. Well, and I'm just filling in for my Uncle David. He's
His shoulder surgery.
correct. He's in Dallas, so I agreed to fill in for him.
Okay.
But we're asking for the prerequisite approval for a private club application for Caminos de Guanajuato Restaurant.
Now, notice I didn't try that.
I've spent the whole meeting rehearsing back there, but, and we also asked for an emergency clause for this, for this ordinance.
Where is it located?
It's in the business park. I believe it's the old Amigo Juan.
Yeah, it's across from Copeland.
Correct. And it's been sitting empty for some time, and I know these folks are...
They've been in there for a while, so they're just asking for this.
Oh, okay. So they are operating.
They're
Yes,
operating.
yeah.
They've been operating. He's just trying to get beer and wine, which
Oh, okay, they've been
with the
Yeah.
new procedures by ABC, the board has to grant them the rights to apply. It's not saying that they're going to get it and they're going to be selling it.
Right.
The board here just has to grant this prerequisite approval to have the, so then the client can apply to the ABC for the permit.
Right. And that permit application, that's the first thing they look at, is this approval
council
ordinance.
approval.
Right.
So the permits we award are not for the building, they're for each different establishment? Because I thought that building already had a permit when it
It's
was
for
Amigo
the-
One.
it's for the establishment.
Okay.
Okay?
Any questions?
Questions for Jake Potter?
I mean, can it be transferred from one?
I don't
That's
think
right.
liquor.
You have to individually.
You
Yeah.
can't, there are circumstances where you can transfer a liquor license, but that doesn't happen very often.
Okay. I think the ABC would do that.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay. If not, I would entertain a motion to have the ordinance, well, we'll just have the ordinance read on its first reading.
Is it the board's pleasure to hear the entire ordinance, or is it
No, I
abbreviated?
move it be read in abbreviated form on the first reading.
Yes.
Okay. She'll need a vote.
All right, so we have a motion to have it read in its abbreviated form. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Calabash.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
An ordinance granting the request for prerequisite municipal approval of a private club application by David Potter as applicant on behalf of Caminos. Now, hear who's on the spot.
Restaurant.
Declaring an emergency and for other purposes.
Ordinance has been read on its first reading. Do I hear a motion to have it read on its second reading tonight?
So moved in abbreviated form.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to have it read in its abbreviated form a second time. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Calabash.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
An ordinance granting the request for prerequisite municipal approval of a private club application by David Potter as applicant on behalf of Caminos, declaring an emergency and for other purposes.
Okay, the ordinance has been read on its second reading tonight. There are a motion to have it read on its third and final reading.
Request we suspend the rules and read it in abbreviated form for third and final reading.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to have it read in its third and final reading. Would you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Calabash.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
An ordinance granting the request for prerequisite municipal approval of a private club application by David Potter as applicant on behalf of Caminos, declaring an emergency and for other purposes.
Okay, the ordinance has been read in its third and final reading. Do I hear a motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adopt. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Calabash.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes. So the ordinance has been adopted. They've asked for an emergency clause. Do I hear a motion to approve of an emergency clause with this ordinance?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve emergency clause. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Calabash.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes. You're done, Jake.
Thank y'all very much.
Okay, moving right along, we'll go back up to the regular agenda. We'll go to item number 5, which is to adopt an ordinance to establish a revised competitive pay rules to regain and maintain a competitive pay package for the Texas and Arkansas civil service employees It says as amended, second reading by Finance Director Tyrone Henderson. Director?
And yes, and since I had sponsored this ordinance, I would request at this time that we negate that one. We don't need a second reading because some changes have been made through some talks in the workshop.
Okay.
So I would make a motion that the new ordinance be read in its first reading.
What we, to probably clean it up, is what we need would be a motion to table that original ordinance permanently.
Yes.
Or indefinitely, so we need a motion to table that ordinance indefinitely for no other consideration.
I move that we table that ordinance.
Okay, so we have a
Second.
second. Could you call the roll, please, Susan?
Harris,
Yes.
Hollibish,
Yes.
Minor,
Yes.
Peavy,
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Rowe.
Yes. So the new ordinance that's before you is for consideration tonight, at least in its first reading. This ordinance can be discussed tonight. I think probably, in speaking with the city attorney, and there are some citizens here that wish to speak on this ordinance, the only way the board will take action tonight is if we were to have this read 3 times tonight. So if that doesn't occur, there will actually be no actual action taken tonight outside of its first or second reading or whatever position that we get in. So prior to the vote of the second reading, any vote for second reading, we would accept comments from the public that are limited to the debate. After the board debate, it would be limited to the subject matter and limited to the 5 minutes prior to a vote. So having said that, then we will proceed with having the ordinance read in its first, on its first reading. Okay. We're going to, do you want to read that ordinance in its entirety?
I think so, because I think some changes have been made, and I want to be completely transparent. So yes, I move it be read on first reading in its entirety.
Okay.
I don't even know that you need a motion for that. That's
Okay.
where you stand right now.
All right.
An ordinance to establish revised competitive compensation rules and to regain and maintain competitive compensation for Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees. Whereas the Board of Directors of the City of Texarkana, Arkansas desire to amend and establish rules to regain and maintain competitive compensation for Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees to better effectuate the 2 1/4 each for police and fire respectively sent special sales and use tax for the purpose of Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees' compensation increases, being initially ordinances K533 and K598, and maintaining competitive compensation for the civil service employees of Texarkana, Arkansas. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Directors of the City of Texarkana, Arkansas, that the following definitions and rules are enacted to carry out the purpose stated above. Section 1, definitions, base compensation. For the purpose of computing competitive pay, compensation excludes holiday pay, comparable to other cities where holiday pay is excluded in base compensation. B, competitive compensation. The annual base compensation for Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees is competitive with the annual base compensation shown in salary surveys, wage comparisons with cities of similar size and population. C, cost of competitive compensation. The amount of money it takes to pay for the increase in base compensation and the incremental increase in benefits that cause increases in workers' employer contributions related to base compensation increases, i.e. workers' compensation, holiday pay, Medicare, and retirement. Rules. A, the city shall fund competitive compensation raises for Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees from the 2 Texarkana, Arkansas 1/4 cent special sales and use tax revenues, general revenues, and/or both. B, no part of a new Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employee's base pay shall apply to the cost of competitive compensation during his/her first year of employment. C, any years that the 2 Texarkana, Arkansas 1/4 cent special sales and use taxes generate enough revenue to cover any deficits in the total cumulative cost of competitive compensation, the competitive compensation is less than that shown in the salary surveys, wage comparisons, competitive compensation will be paid. D, any years that the 2 Texarkana, Arkansas 1/4 cent special sales and use taxes do not generate enough revenue to cover any deficits in the total cumulative cost of competitive compensation, the city's budgeted unreserved balance is less than 65 days of expenditures, and competitive compensation is less than that shown in salary surveys wage comparisons, civil service employees will not receive an increase in their competitive compensation. E, in the years that the two Texarkana, Arkansas quarter-cent sales and special use taxes do not generate enough revenue to cover any deficits in the total cumulative cost of competitive compensation, the city of Texarkana, Arkansas's budgeted unreserved fund balance is between 65 and 85 days of expenditures, and competitive compensation is less than that shown in salary surveys, wage comparisons. The civil service employees will receive a 2% increase in their competitive compensation. If the percentage to reach competitive compensation is less than 2%, then only the percentage required to reach competitive compensation will be given. F, in the years that the two Texarkana, Arkansas quarter-cent special sales and use taxes do not generate enough revenue to cover any deficits in the total cumulative cost of competitive compensation, the city of Texarkana, Arkansas's budgeted unreserved fund balance is more than 85 days of expenditures, and the competitive compensation is less than that shown in the salary surveys, wage comparisons. The Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees will receive a 4% increase in their competitive compensation. If the percentage to reach competitive compensation is less than 4%, then only the percentage required to reach competitive compensation will be given. G, competitive compensation will be reviewed annually during the budget process. H, the Texarkana, Arkansas Board of Directors reserve the right to issue a stipend at any time they deem necessary. I, notwithstanding anything contained in this ordinance or any ordinance amended hereby, all future increases in competitive compensation are subject to the approval of the then existing Board of Directors. Accordingly, in no event shall any specific increase in competitive compensation be implemented, due, or owed unless and until the then existing Board of Directors approves the same and implements any corresponding annual budget appropriation and expense allocations. Section 3, repealer. All ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are hereby repealed. Passed and approved this 5th day of August 2019.
Okay, the ordinance has been read on its first reading. At this time, we will have any board discussion to discuss the ordinance. I believe we'll give Assistant Mayor Teeters the first opportunity to speak. It's the sponsor of the ordinance, so we'll just go from there after you can make any comments or anything you wish to comment on in the ordinance.
I think the things that were addressed in the workshop, along with conversations that I've had, anything that I had issues with it, I think it's been covered. So at this time, I really don't have anything to add.
All right. Any other directors?
I think that from the workshop, the points that you made, Mayor, and then what we were agreeable to, what was sent to us and so forth, I think this is a good compromise.
I would just like to make a couple of comments. One, I want to clarify a couple of things. For one, and that, I received this ordinance Thursday, so I have read it. I do have a couple of other issues with it, and I speak from that from the financial side of the ordinance on something that I would like to see the city move forward on, something that we can continue to pay. And so I'll bring up a couple of points about that. I also noted in correspondence that the city attorney has read this ordinance, and the city attorney has said this is a good compromise. In relation, and I'll let him speak for himself, but in relation to when he and I discuss compromise, he discusses compromise from the standpoint of unconstitutionality, that this is more defendable. He does not make any reference to, and again, I'll let him speak for himself, to the policy making of this ordinance as to if it's in the best interest of the city or not in the best interest of the city. And if you want to comment or
Mayor, I don't know exactly what the correspondence says, but I guess my question is, or my statement is, I don't set the policy. That's what the board does. What I was asked to look at is the defensibility of this in light of the constitutional problems that have been brought to light with the other one. This one does two things that would help in defense of that. One is it removes a direct reference to Texarkana, Texas. And the second, it brings it back to an annual approval that's very explicit of the Board of Directors and placing that in their discretion on a year-to-year basis.
And I certainly agree that we have put something forth that is certainly defendable, but there's still some just what I would call just some open language that I would hope that we would consider addressing with a couple of points, and that be one, is we're still defining A, B, and C pay, when I think it's not necessary. We should just describe base pay. We really, in this ordinance, don't even define what base pay is. We say what it's not, but we don't describe, in my opinion, what base pay actually is. And base pay, again, is we understand now that it's calculated separately on the other side of state line, which is what we're trying to get away from. That's unconstitutional. But I'm not for sure why we're still considering three types of compensation when we should be basing any pay raises, in my opinion, off of base pay. Then when we get to C and we say any years that the two Texarkana, Arkansas quarter-cent sales and use taxes generate enough revenue to cover any deficits, in the total cumulative cost of competitive compensation, the competitive compensation is less than that shown in the salary survey. In comparisons, competitive compensation will be paid. So who is to say that those salary surveys go up and we are actually stating we will pay that? What if we cannot? What if we can't match those pays that, and my response is to go back to say, how are we going to calculate when it is not enough? Are we going to use the finance director's spreadsheets to show that the tax did not generate enough? Because that's basically where we're at the present time, is we're assuming that it's not generating enough revenue. Or do we go back to the fund balance, and if the fund balance is high, we assume that it did generate enough? Yes.
Okay, clarification. On C, this is only when the 2/4 cents do make the difference. So it wouldn't be could the city afford it. C's saying if we have the tax, the 2/4% do make enough.
Okay.
So I don't.
That is my question: is how do we know what is enough? How do we know that it did cover? How do we know that those 2/4 cents covered the compensation? That's what I'm saying. Right now, it's not enough, so you've got to make up additional, that's just my personal opinion, but you got to make up additional revenue to do it. So, and maybe Ms. Henderson can help us understand this, but how are we going to know in the future? The fund balance and everything naturally would be up, I would say, to consider any type raises, period. You're going to have the fund balance up, but how are you going to continue to calculate and know that it was enough to do it?
Well, my opinion on C is, let's just say, for example, next year, based on the medical marijuana or something, that the 1/4%, and I'm assuming that's on sales tax.
Correct.
And so let's just say that there was a huge year and the 2/4% brought in an astronomical amount that we were not anticipating. That's what C, to me, covers, is that if we're bringing in enough sales tax to cover that, then obviously that's what the city is going to use it for, because that's what the voters said in 1996, is that that's where the money's going. I think this ordinance is primarily just saying if we have enough, it's a non-issue. It's when the tax isn't enough to cover it that then we go into these D, E, and F. Is that, I mean, I understand that correctly?
Well, my only point would be is there could be, even if revenue has increased, there could be certain situations where it still may not be enough to cover the deficit of what would be given. What I'm trying to point out is, yes, we want to award, and when sales tax revenue is up, yes, we're going to reward employees. That's, in my original thought process, was to add non-civil, which I hope that we don't forget about non-civil employees, and I don't think any of you guys will. But all I'm saying is that appears to be a loophole to me. It's not defined. It's not. It's out there to where if you're going to go continue to do this, it takes a certain amount of money to give a 1%, a 2%, a 3%, a 4%. And when we do get up into the 4%, that's what really scares me on down the road, is because, again, my biggest concern is to not get back in the situation we're in right now, is to continue to compound any raises that are awarded to civil or non-civil employees, for that matter, and not be allowed to carry them through on an ongoing basis, not knowing what the revenue of the city will be. And so when you get up into even the 85-day mark, that would be a wonderful situation for the city. I hope we could get there at some point in time, but once we get to an 85-day, we would basically award, if comparisons rule, and I understand that. I understand what the ordinance is saying. If we awarded that 4% raise, you're compounding that. That's $400 and something thousand when you give a 4% raise. So if the next year the revenues aren't good, we're not going to give any, but the revenues weren't as good, the fund balance is probably not 85 days, and you're continuing to have to pay those 4% raises that you just gave out in that previous year.
But I think your flip side of that, Mayor, would be if we honor a raise, we're not anticipating what's going to happen 5 or 10 years. We're certainly not going to cut their pay.
No, sir. That's
So,
correct.
but, I mean, I would think that every city, corporation, whatever the entity is, I mean, you give raises when you can afford it. You don't stand back and say, oh, well, I'm scared, maybe in 10 years, we won't have this, so we better not give the raise now because we don't know what may be happening in 10 years. My opinion is when the city can afford it, then we,
I really think you should look at I mean, I think it really sets the tone for this document moving forward. It basically gives the board the authority to issue raises at the end of the year if they deem that we have the revenue to make that happen. I think it pays for itself.
Mayor, if I may, could I ask Ms. Henderson to come forward? Because just breaking this down in some simplistic terms, on my checkbook, you know, how did you know that going back to like 2008, we didn't have enough money from that half-cent sales tax to cover the raises? How did you know that? It's kind of like, to me, I know what I've spent, I know what I made, and then I know what I don't have enough to cover, and so am I being too simplistic? How did you calculate that?
No, ma'am, that's exactly what happened. Annually, and in fact, more than that, I go back and I look at the revenue received in direct comparison to the expenditures that went out. And I put those items together into a spreadsheet form. And I know it's complicated, but as simply as I possibly can, in a way that anyone will be able to understand that there has been a deficit in the revenue collected in comparison to the expenditures that have been paid out.
I think you gave us a sheet like that
Yes,
one
ma'am.
time.
Yes, ma'am.
The only point I would
was
make
very
with that is
telling.
that it's subject to debate. That's what I've read and studied those such spreadsheets, and I can tell you that she is doing exactly what she is supposed to be doing. There are some other people thinking that the ordinance could be interpreted in a different manner in which that those numbers could be compiled based on base pay of an officer today and not 1996. So there's room for scrutiny, I would say, so to speak, that we have an opportunity possibly within this ordinance to remove that and get back on the basis of what I would consider, and that is to award these salary increases based on how well the city does, which I understand this is getting there, this is that, but when we get to a certain point, just like raising, the point would be is raising, and the last point I would make tonight would be the raising of the fund balance, which, again, that is subject to debate, because there's several people in this room here today that believe our fund balance is too high. Just because the municipal league and all cities around say 60 days, some people disagree with that. Some people think we ought to have 20 days.
But you have to go by the state, don't you?
There's not a state mandate, it's a
Just a
state
suggestion.
suggestion. It's not a statute. It's just a suggested day. Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
I can tell you from a cash flow standpoint, if you reduce those numbers below 60 days,
Right.
we are in trouble.
I agree.
Wait a minute now,
I agree.
I'm hearing from the mayor that it's only a suggestion, so who are we in trouble from?
From a cash flow standpoint,
Yeah.
from the amount of money
Yeah,
that
make it
we
instant.
have to
Okay.
flow.
Oh, I agree 100% that 60 days is probably not enough, but again, I'm just saying that there are some people here who believe that that's way too much money, but it's really not. So that just opens up another can of worms to decide. But increasing, the last point I'll make is increasing the fund balance by those 5 days. It's basically $50,000 a day. So you have increased that according to our board policy, if this was to pass, we would we'd have to change our fiscal policy to match this because it's still at 60 days. We've added a $200,000 cushion to that fund balance. Why did we do that? Well, the reason I wanted to do that is because going forward, we still have that extra 5 days to continue to pay those raises. So when you get up to an 85 or 84-day fund balance, and we were to have to, or all the formula fit into place and we awarded a 4% raise, you're still only covering half of that going forward if the city was to get in a situation where you couldn't continue to pay it. So as I pointed out in the workshop is that I can't and won't guarantee anybody's employment. But what I would like to focus on, what I'm trying to focus on, is try to put a policy in place that we don't get in a situation where we're set here, we don't have enough. We got to try to figure out what we can do to compound those raises going forward when they're awarded. And certainly adding money to the fund balance does that. But when you give a 4% raise, you've only covered half of it. And yes, we want the city to prosper. I want the city to prosper, but like anybody else. And now's a good time to try to fix this, as I've said, because we have some things that are going for us that should increase our revenues. We can't, in my opinion, spend it all in pay, but we should be able to go forward. And I just think that if we work just a little bit longer, maybe we can come up with some type of compromise that really would help the stability going forward, that we don't sit in here and have to maintain we need to have a discussion about how we are calculating whether it's enough or whether it's not. Because believe me, that would be very scrutinized when it comes to that point, because we would say it's not enough. And that is going to be subject to interpretation. So I just would like to see us maybe just move a little bit closer and a little bit further to something that solidifies that going forward we can maintain it. We can do the best we can to try to maintain it, rather than your only other option after that point would be to lay somebody off. Yes, ma'am.
So question, because I don't want this thing to drag out.
No.
And it's months now. What would be your proposal, Mayor Brown, if we took away the 4%, if you don't mind me asking? If that's the part that you're not liking? What would your proposal be to that, so that we can say, yeah, we're on board, or no, that's not going to fly?
I think a more realistic approach would be to go back and discuss what we discussed and what I discussed in the future, and that would be to look at a cap of 3% and only looking at something on a every year basis. But that has to be sold to the police association. I don't know that they support this ordinance, but they're the ones that are going to have to live by this ordinance, but be more realistic in the approach of committing as to what the city can do and not what we think we can do. And that's where we are right now with the current situation we're in. We thought we could do it. It was a great idea when we passed it, and it has just not kept up with the amount of salaries that we have been able to pay. And I just don't want to get in that situation again. And I think this ordinance will do that. It may not be tomorrow, it may not be next year, but I think that we have some loopholes, so to speak, in here to where we could be sitting here in the same ship going, we just don't have enough to do it. Well, the loophole is there for us to get out. If the money's not there, we say we're not giving them.
But doesn't I say that?
Yes.
Doesn't I say it goes to the board every year?
Yeah.
And if something comes up and we can't increase above that 4%, then isn't that what our job is as stewards for the city, is to address that on an annual basis?
It is, but this ordinance
Subject
has some
to the
commitments in
approval
here that I don't know that we can follow through with.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said that it does say that, but I think there are a few items in here that are commitments that I don't think we can uphold on down the road.
3% is $370,000. And you quoted something about 4%, it's for something. We're talking lots of money.
But I think that we lose sight of the fact that parity tax, that half and half, has got our salaries in a very competitive position with, everybody knows, with the exception of 2%. That over the years has allowed us to get into, now we've robbed Peter to pay Paul in some cases to do that, but it's allowed us to get paid to a competitive basis. The problem is trying to maintain it, and Einstein probably couldn't figure out how to maintain it and guarantee anything.
True,
That's
nothing's
not
guaranteed.
what I'm trying to do. But I would think reasonably that even with my experience at where I work, is that if you could maintain a 3% raise on an every other year basis or something to that point, a year and a half, a percentage and a half every year, you're going to maintain parity. You're going to maintain that bad word that if you were able to do that, you would be pretty much at par. Now, that's providing that that person stays in that same job. Now, that person is promoted, that person goes to that, particular salary. But most people, rule of thumb, this year, I read an article yesterday, this year, the largest rate of increase is going to be just a little bit over 3%. It's not been that high in quite some time. It's been in the 75 to 2%, and this year's national average is going to be 3%. But going to that every other year basis, if salaries increase on average with inflation of about 1.5%, then 3% every other year, but it also gives the city another year to build our coffers, to make sure that we can maintain it. I mean, that's all I'm saying, is try to figure out a way. Is that the best way to do it? I don't know, but that's the best way I can come up with to try to keep maintaining this and to keep paying these guys and not try to have to lay somebody off or cut departments or do anything like that. But I mean, I would just like to try to take one last attempt to try to just close what I would consider would be a couple of loopholes so that we don't end up in the same position that we're at. If you go up to the 85-day mark on that, it says 65 to 85 days. So that tells me on the 66th day of the fund balance and all those formulas fell in place, we could give that raise. At 66, we would want it to be 85. But when that range falls between there, that scares me because that's the lower end of the spectrum that falls within that range. And if you aren't doing your formulas correctly, then we would be back in a pinch again.
Well, I agree, but, I mean, we have to start somewhere. I mean, yeah, we have a spectrum, and we hope you're not on the minimum end or the maximum end at all times, but you gotta have a baseline to start. We can't say, let's do 80, no, let's do 90, because 80's not good enough. We have to pick a number. We must have a baseline.
The perfect scenario is to work off of the actual ending year fund balance at the end of the year. I don't know that we would ever get there, but that is the actual, if you raise that threshold to that 65 days, you work off what the actual fund balance is at the end of that year. That is exactly what we have. And that's what you award out, and you're putting 5 additional days back to help compensate a 2% raise. It's not the budgeted projected fund balance at the end of 20. It is the actual fund balance at the end of that year. That's what the city has, is it not? That's what the city has, and that's what you could spend. And that would be a perfect scenario, is to go off of what the city has at the end of after the books are closed, after everything has come through. That's exactly what it has. How many days is that? I don't know. It's 70-something days right now, but that's still projected based on the end of the year. What is the actual today? Do you know?
The actual today, we're still waiting on our auditors to get everything.
Right. Okay. So I mean, that's the perfect scenario. That's how we operate. That's how much we have in our checking accounts. That's how much we can spend.
I can see that. When do they usually get that information to you, Tyrone?
Hopefully, there's been some delays, but by August 31st, we should have it. But it should be within the next couple of weeks. We should have all of our drafts complete.
And there's probably some people in the audience probably not going to agree with that, but I can just tell you, you can spend what you have, and that's what I would like to see the ordinance move to, is to cut out all these formulas as to what they don't mean anything if you don't have the money.
And it's addressed in here. If the money's not there, it's addressed. If the money isn't there, we don't do it.
What addresses in here is how you're determining whether we have the money or not.
Right.
Who's to say that those 2 quarters hadn't been enough? And who's to say this is that? Who's to say this is
It
that?
hadn't been enough in 20 years, right?
No,
Correct.
we've addressed how she has determined when it hasn't been enough, going back to 2008.
Sure.
And if there was anything wrong with that, the auditors would have caught that. And so I don't want, Ms. Henderson, I believe, does a very fine job in projecting those numbers.
Let me, yeah, and I agree totally, but just clarifying that I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the money. The money is there and 100% accounted for. It's the calculation between what parity has actually cost and what has come in is audited and done. There's absolutely, and she's done a wonderful job of taking care of that. It's the spreadsheets that we use that people calculate how much parities actually cost. She calculates it based on what the ordinance says. And that, to me, is just, it's subject to some scrutiny. Has there been other suggestions, Ms. Henderson, about how it should be calculated?
No, sir.
As far as,
In fact, after speaking with several people, they do not argue with the numbers because they don't have an issue with the numbers and the way that they're calculated, because they're simply based and directly what is in the ordinance. Now, if there is an issue, I would be willing, I'd be willing to sit down and meet with anyone at any point in time to explain the spreadsheets in detail, as I have with yourself and several other board members, with members of the police department. They've been to my office and I've sat down and I spoke to several people on a calculation of those numbers. And if anyone has any true questions about, I'd be more than willing, but I don't want anyone to have any doubt in the information that we provide to this board. My department works very hard to make sure that we provide the most correct information available at all times. And so that's a big part of what we do, is provide the information you all need to make good, sound decisions, and that's what we'll continue to do. So if there's ever any issues in any spreadsheet, any calculation, because those same spreadsheets and calculations are given to our auditors as well.
Right.
So I would be more than willing to explain those to anyone if they have any questions on how things are done, and if there are any other suggestions that are actually in the ordinance that are based upon what was approved by the voters and by this board, I'd be more than willing to take those into consideration.
so noted, thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
And
Henderson.
I do appreciate what you do. Okay, is there any other discussion from the board members? Director Harris?
I guess I got some comments to make, and I start off with Texarkana, Texas, and from they do their budget from October to October, from 2018 to 2019, whereas Texarkana, Arkansas do they base their budget on from January to December. And I know every time for over the past 16 years, I've been asked the question by the local news media, especially when the election come up, do you support parity pay? My answer has been, I would support the will of the voters, which I will explain later on. So what I did today is I looked online and I got a copy of Texarkana, Texas budget, which as I previously stated, they do theirs mostly every October. And I'm gonna try to stick with something close as possible. So I'm gonna go. They proposed 2018, where just along what they revenue proposing and for 2018-19 is $34,878,544. Where they fine and forfeit, which is, I guess, with ticket writing, court and stuff, is basically $1,670,870, where the franchise fee alone is $1,460,000 and $1,460,750. And then the property tax revenue is about $13 million, and the other sales tax revenue is, which you say other tax would mostly be sales tax, was $16,704,000 and $658. Okay, and they total. Okay, now on the Texas side, they police expected to pay proposed for 2018, 2019 is $8,939,000 and $8,939,000 Whereas they add they fire and police together, which roughly $6,460,000, and they property tax. Did I do property tax revenue? Yeah, I did property tax revenue, and that's just them alone on that. But they suspected for the next 3 or 4 years, where in 2019 they police expect to be $8,939,000 roughly, and they 2020 $9,663,000. And then the fire and they fire and emergency management together, which in 2018 they expect to be $6,460,000. And 2019 $6,562,000. and 2020, $6,442,000. And their franchise fees is based on the same as our gas, electric, telephone, and cable. But what's so unique about them is from Texas side, which basically is down the line, they got 475 fee categories where they be getting money from. From their budget, they getting 400 different sources of money, which come to 475 categories. And they total budget for roughly for Arkansas, for Texarkana, Texas, for the police department, it represents 22% of their budget. They budget their fire department represents 16%, which they put fire and emergency management together. Now, so now this is what Arkansas is doing. That our property tax alone is only a budget of $2,626,000. While our sales tax, now look what I just said about Texas sales tax, but our sales tax alone is only $9,571,000. You see the big disparity right there, sales tax alone. And then franchise fee, we do a little bit more in the franchise fee, and it's $2,777,000. What I told the general income fund is only about roughly $19 million. Now, we're gonna be basing it on what Texas side doing somewhere down the line. I just trying to let the voters really hear what we basing on something that, and I don't see how we will ever down the line compete based on those facts there. But also, the mayor did talk about something during the last workshop, they got a fund just when business called City Economic Development Administrator, where they go out and they give a incentive just to bring in new job in the city, and so far they got $761,000 just for that. We don't even have a fund for that. So for that right there, and our currently police is $7 million and roughly $22,000, and it's roughly 30. No, I'm gonna do 2018. 28, and our police was 42,000. Was 42%, and in 2018 we roughly paid $7,766,000 for police together. And our fire alone in 2018 was 27% was $4,984,000. In 2019 it's projected to be 26% of our budget, and it's $5,095,000. And then our source of our general fund revenue basically is going to be general property tax, sales tax, franchise fee, license permit, other government fund and fine enforcement. And then I'm going to go ahead and answer that question when I said that I would support the will of the voters. That I know back in 1995, when I think the election was January the 9th in 96, that's when they had the election. That's when the voters passed parity pay. But the issue was saying that parity pay, now we is changing the language to something else. Then I kind of wonder, can we continue on, or should there be another election based on the wording of this? Because till we continue to use this, which I'm going to ask the city attorney, because we changing the wording of what the voters had proved, and they proved basically they say a parity pay, and that's in the language through the ordinance of the city passed. That's in the ordinance what the voters passed. Now we finna modify something what the voters changed. This body up here now. I somewhat question, do this body, governing bodies have the authority to change the will of the voters? And that's what I'm getting to. That the will of the voters was saying parity pay, and now we changed it to a competitive pay, and that's the reason why I'm asking, should there be another election based on that? Then one thing was solve all the problem as to the way this ordinance was written, that if a clause in there said all time that this board of director will has the right to impose Arkansas Code of Anto 1451-304 back in 1987. That's really just where we said, where recommendations come up, that the board would have the authority one way down the line as to accept or reject any proposal that's done. And what I would recommend saying that how it was done, just say at the end of the year, the police or fire send a recommendation to the board. And based on the recommendation, the board can look at the figure and we can say, well, we accept that, or we'll reject that, or we have to wait another 6 months, or wait till the money is there. It's kind of like what the mayor is saying, but it would be in writing. That's really not holding our foot to the fire on anything. And I don't really want to try to get into what everybody know as to what this is somewhat unconstitutional, because we wouldn't be at this point based on the unconstitutional of what been done in the past. So I don't really need to try to say as to read this as to what was sent, as to what was unconstitutional, what not unconstitutional, because I don't really see no point in it. But at the end of the day, I kind of agree with you, Mayor, that this need to be put back and at the end of the day back in this board hand, and then and based on the figures I gave as to what Texas side is projecting to have, will we ever meet that guideline? You can just go over Texas side right today. It's still booming. I see they got a new housing project being built right along New Boston Road, and they're going to increase their property tax again, and then the sales tax. Really, but what's going to help us is, I hate to say this, that somewhere down the line when marijuana go to recreational use, that's probably going to pull us out of the hole.
We're going to have to hire some more police officers.
But I hate to say that, but that's probably going to end up, because we're going to have to do something somewhere to get the revenue, so we continue doing what was need to be doing, and that's basically what I had to say.
Thank you, Director Harris. Director Speaker.
I just had one comment. If you were at that summary judgment hearing, Judge Johnson made it perfectly clear. He wanted this city board to do something about it. He said, do not make me outlaw parity, because I will. It's illegal. And so he directed this board quite emphatically to address it before he did. And that's why we're here. We can't kick this can down the road. It's not fair to tell our civil service employees and our non-civil service employees, fire, police, city employees, everybody. I don't think it's fair to tell them every year. I will see. But this ordinance is trying in earnest to not lose the 2.25% sales taxes that we collect and that we have been collecting. That is the purpose for me sponsoring this ordinance. And I'll move any mountain I need to. I'll work in hell or high water. But we have to address this. We can't kick it down the road. And if we don't do it, the judge is going to rule the tax unconstitutional, and we all lose.
And I'm not sure at this point, because that is the point that came through, that needed to be addressed, so that that's not lost. I'm not sure at this point we can get a perfect ordinance right off the bat. There's nothing stating that we can't go back and we can't readdress things that become clearer to us. But right now, what has been made clear, like Director Teeter said, is that we need
to act.
Sir, for me to answer your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Director, you asked about the ability of the board to modify or amend an initiated vote of the people. Article 5, Section 1 of the Arkansas Constitution of 18 74 says that no measure approved by a vote of the people should be amended or repealed by any city council except upon the yea and nay vote on roll call of 2/3 of the members elected to the city council.
So any vote of 5 could repeal any.
2/3. Yes, correct.
Any other comments from the board? Okay. Having the ordinance read in its first reading, I'm going to ask for a motion to have the ordinance read on its second reading tonight. If that motion receives a second, then we will hear any consideration from the public prior to voting. Okay? So at this time, do I hear a motion to have this ordinance read on its second reading?
Make a motion to have it read in the second reading?
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to have the ordinance read on its second reading. At this time, is there anyone, I know that I have one here that would like to speak pertaining to this ordinance. That's David Hake. If you come forward. Please limit your remarks to non-personal. The board is not to exchange remarks with you. Just make your point. You'll have your 5 minutes.
Okay. Board, and first of all, we would be opposed to this as the plaintiffs and probably the police association. I'm not sure. They'll have to make that decision. But I think what the judge also said, he said all parties that came need to be in this and come up with a common solution to the problem. And so far, there's been no discussion with the other two parties, which is the plaintiffs and the police association. None. You have not had a workshop where we've been invited to have an open discussion with you at all. Now then, as far as constitutionality, if you want to try that, go ahead. But the only way that's going to take it off the table is to have an agreed solution and a court order on that solution. And the reason why, because your ordinances don't mean anything. You're in violation of I think it's 236 right now, because we have the money and you haven't paid parity. This board can change an ordinance. This board can, any board, this board can change an ordinance, and you can change this one tomorrow. In fact of all, you're already changing one now. So therefore, to protect the police in the future, it needs to be something that's really locked down. You cannot lock it down, because another board can change it. All it takes is just the necessary votes. So again, we still say it will be unconstitutional. You don't want to go there. You really don't. But we want to be invited for an open discussion. We don't want to go there either, but we want some input. If not, your city attorney has already made the decision that it is unconstitutional. If this goes forward and it passes in 2 weeks from now, we will simply ask our attorney to go ahead and ask the judge to make a ruling. And you know what happens from there. Also, it'll be an illegal exaction. We will ask for return funds for as long as we can go back, refunded to the residents of Texarkana, Arkansas. 3 years, $6.6 million. 5 years, $11 million. 10 years, $20 million. Do you have it? I don't think so. So we're after a conclusion one way or the other. You set it in motion with your attorney, Ralph Ohm. And so we can decide what happens. Also, if you can't pay, I hate to say this, but then the city is bankrupt. And if you can't handle that, then I guess we'll have to ask the state to come in with a special master and replace the board and the city manager and run the city. It's in your hands. Do you want to cooperate with us or not? That's what I'm saying. That's why we are opposed to this particular ordinance.
Don't that get back to what I just said, that we could not change the will of the voters?
No, well, your question was amending an initiative
Right.
petition. And the Constitution, as I said, I think Mr. Akers said it too, it can be done. This one's been done in the past.
Okay.
You know, there have been different rules established for these in the past.
What is he saying that you said was unconstitutional? I'm sorry.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Okay, then,
Also, when we were at the workshop, there at the end, you may not have been there, Mr. Haig, but John Warmack was there.
Yes, I know.
And he got to speak.
He
And
got
he
to
was
speak.
invited to speak.
Yes. Did he have any input on what this ordinance was?
I believe he did.
No, I think the ordinance was already written.
Absolutely, it was not.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
But I got a question.
Okay.
Now, the only person that's up here that's a party to the lawsuit is the city manager, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, I think the city manager and the reference to the mayor hasn't changed, although I don't think it's a personal lawsuit against the mayor over parity. It would be in his official capacity.
Oh, okay.
So the style of the case hasn't changed, but I would say the city manager and the mayor.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Yes.
Chief Fletcher, may I say something to you first?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's quite all right. I'm glad you're coming to speak, and I don't have an idea what, but I want to apologize to you because of that workshop last week. The fire had made it perfectly clear that they weren't a part of the lawsuit, and they did not want to be a part. But once we called the workshop, and once the judge made his feelings known that he refused to keep them separate, that he was going to force police and fire into this if he had to, you should have been brought into the mix at that point. And board members were allowed to speak. The police association was allowed to speak. You were sitting in the audience, and you were never asked if you wanted to speak. The plaintiffs were even allowed to speak in a lawsuit that right now we're not really addressing. We're addressing a city ordinance for the city. So I want to apologize that you were not asked for your input at that workshop.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Mayor, board directors, Dr. Haskin. First, I'd like to start out by thanking the board for trying to create an ordinance that could avert a possible disaster from this lawsuit that we face. It's obviously a tough job, and we appreciate y'all's efforts in that part. The fire department has tried to remain neutral, but as Mrs. Steers pointed out, that's going to be an impossibility. We've tried to stick with Ordinance L 236, which we've had with the city now. And we've even gone so far to agree to some draft ordinances that cut down the amount that we as guaranteed raises. But the ordinance we're looking at now, we can't agree or support it. The two reasons we do not support it are it still links us with the police department. Their budget is considerably larger than ours, and that dilutes our quarter-cent tax. The quarter-cent that the fire department receives, it actually pays about a third of our base salary. That's quite significant. If you combine those two together, then it just dilutes that. The second reason on that ordinance is the competitive pay definition. That is so vague as to who we're going to base this on that we could possibly not see a raise for years. I mean, are you going to reach into Arkansas, say to Russellville, Paragould, start looking at them? You know, or are we looking at where we really compete, which is right here in Texarkana? Nothing is more important to our organization than quality personnel. And at the moment, we're blessed with them. And for the benefit of the citizens we serve, I'd like to keep it that way. In closing, the fire department, we would like to be removed from the ordinance now under consideration. We appreciate the opportunity to reach a fair agreement with all concerned parties and stand alone on our own ordinance. That is it. Any questions?
Didn't we amend the ordinance, Tyronda, so that the 1/4% is never mixed?
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't remember hearing that when.
I remember, I think
It's in the very beginning.
it's in the very beginning that,
We actually changed, if I recall right, there was one sentence that was changed. The rest of the ordinance still talks about the half cent.
right. But I requested that that be made separate, all throughout the ordinance,
Okay, so
because
there
I
was a-
agree with you.
Okay, well, it's
I-
not.
Yeah, okay.
Just a simple adjustment, Chief, will make that whole.
Any other questions for Chief Fletcher? Thank you, Chief
Another
Fletcher.
question? Thank you.
Is anyone else?
Mayor, I have a question about the motion that's pending, suspend the rules and put it on second reading. Is the intent to hear it in its entirety again?
No, abbreviated forms.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to have the ordinance read on its second reading tonight in its abbreviated form. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
Yes.
Holliday.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
I have a question. Are we voting to have the ordinance read in its second reading?
Second reading,
And then once it's read in its second reading, it goes to the third?
correct.
No.
So that's 5. An ordinance to establish revised competitive compensation rules and to regain and maintain competitive compensation for Texarkana, Arkansas civil service employees.
Okay, we have a motion to, we've read the ordinance in its second reading. We have a motion to have the ordinance read in its third and final reading tonight. Is there a motion to have it read in its abbreviated form on its third and final reading?
Let me ask you a question. I want to go and say yes because apparently, and get this off the table, apparently this not going anywhere from what I'm hearing. So if we don't, it's going to come back, then you're going to have to do what you did before, if I'm not mistaken.
You could vote on it tonight, pass or fail.
Right.
Yes, that's what your question is.
Yeah, well, it's not my ordinance, but
So.
Move that it be read in its third reading in abbreviated form.
Okay, we have a
Second.
second. We have a motion and a second to have it read in its third and final reading. Could you call the roll, please?
Harris.
no.
Holliday.
Yes.
Minor.
Yes.
Petey.
Yes.
Teeters.
Yes.
Brown.
No.
Well, that's insufficient votes to put it on its third reading.
So the ordinance will move to the next meeting, which will be, what's the meeting day, Heather?
19.
So this ordinance will move to Monday, August the 19th agenda. All right, moving right along, we have one other item tonight on the agenda before citizens' communication time, and that is to adopt an ordinance to establish an entertainment district that allows open containers of alcohol and consumption in the district. It's been recommended for board approval by the Planning Commission and the Planning Department. City Planner Mary Beck, and I believe Booch Thomas is here if we have any questions or concerns from the Planning Commission. Ms. Beck?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mayor, Directors, Dr. Haskin, George, and Heather. Early in April of this year, the Senate Bill 492 was passed. Voting for Texarkana in favor was Senator Jimmy Hickey, and later at the House, Representative Carl Dalby voted also in favor. That bill now allows for municipalities that have commercial areas with both restaurants that serve alcohol and venues for entertainment to be able to decide to have entertainment districts that can allow open container alcohol consumption in these districts. Following the Senate passage, City Manager Dr. Haskin contacted planning staff and requested review and recommendations from the Planning Commission on whether an entertainment district would be right for Texarkana. April 9th, the Planning Commission met and heard the request for review. They asked staff to do additional notifications before discussing matters any further. Letters of invitation to the May Planning Commission meeting were mailed to 84 property owners in the downtown area. May 14th, the Planning Commission met in a regular meeting which is advertised at least 15 days in advance and open to the public. At that meeting, the Commission discussed boundaries, safety, sanitation, excuse me, rules for carryout, possible marked cups, possibly naming the district, etc., with business and/or property owners who attended.
Ms. Beck, excuse me just a minute. Tyler, can you shut those doors or ask those guys to?
They're quiet.
Sorry about that. I hated to interrupt you, but I
It's
know
all right.
some people are having a hard time hearing.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, well, we had the doors open. There's some conversations going on in the hallway, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Continuing the review, the commission requested additional input for further discussion. For the June meeting, in addition to the required legal notice, invitations were made in person, by email, telephone, or otherwise to the Historic District Commission, Main Street, City Beautiful, Police Chief Harrison, and any interested parties to participate in a workshop June 11th. One phone call expressing opposition to any additional alcohol venues was received from a citizen. All other comments that have been expressed to staff have been in support of establishing an entertainment district. June 11th, the Planning Commission held a workshop advertised and open to the public, also attended by Chief Harrison, property and business owners, representatives from Main Street, and from the Historic District Commission. The business owners in particular wanted to control any restrictions for their own establishments with as little interference as possible, and were very much in favor of the district. A consensus of their recommendations and the guidance of the Planning Commission were compiled to prepare for a final workshop, although if needed, another workshop could have been scheduled. July 9th, so sorry. Planning Commission held a workshop to consider a draft ordinance to be reviewed by the city attorney. Following that workshop, a public hearing was held. Boundaries had been reduced. There it is. This is a map of downtown. Here's the post office for reference, the Bi-State. This is City Hall. So the boundaries you see would go along 5th Street to where Johnny B's is. I come down Walnut Street in front of City Hall, down 3rd Street, and over to Hazel Street, and, well, no, that's Laurel Street, I believe. Laurel, over Broad Street, along Front Street, and then back up State Line Avenue. This way, it encompasses all the restaurants and bars in the downtown area. Originally, it was the Main Street area that was proposed, and it went over a little further, but it took in some properties that weren't really relevant to entertainment or restaurants or anything. So it was recommended that it be cut down to those boundaries. So no district name was decided on, as input from workshops and social media did not identify a name that had majority of support, although a name may develop organically. Now it's just an entertainment district. Should it go forward? Restrictions decided on are the boundaries, the hours of operation, to be posted with signage, no glass containers of any kind during entertainment hours, with all other state laws applying. An added emphasis on no underage drinking and no carryout of open containers from liquor stores. The hours to be posted are those of the Arkansas state law for sale of alcohol, as recommended by Police Chief Harrison. Some or all the streets may be closed at the discretion of the city manager or his assignees for street dances or cultural events. The Planning Commission certifies recommendation of this ordinance by a roll call vote of 5-0 with 2 commissioners absent. And the Planning Commission offered additional input covered in the staff memo regarding accountability of entertainment acts to register with regard to cleanup, adequate trash removal, and to have the rules ready available to the public. I'm be glad to answer any questions and the chairman of the Planning Commission, Boots Thomas, is here also, if you have any questions for him, or if you'd like to hear him speak.
Mary, I have a question. How many
Yes, ma'am.
blocks does this encompass?
Well, I just have to count them. But it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, about 14 and a half.
Okay. And the problem I have, and I've been contacted about this, and
Yes, ma'am.
no one who has contacted me has voiced approval
Really?
so far. And I went online and I looked at what El Dorado passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen these rules that you're talking about that have been established. Are they available to look at? Like, what are the hours?
Exactly. The hours are in the ordinance. They're Sunday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., and Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2 a.m.
Okay, all right, and yes, I remember that now, that's a long time. Let me just briefly read a little bit right here, if I may. And this is concerning Little Rock. They passed for the entertainment district.
Yes, ma'am.
This measure allows open containers of alcohol outdoors in a 4-block zone on weekends and is in effect for limited hours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and gave the time like 11 to 2 a.m. and for certain events and holidays. So when we have all 7 days of the week covered for this, what is the purpose? What is the vision? Just to have, is it okay with these restaurants if people go in and out of these restaurants and they don't care if their patrons buy their alcohol or anything? They can walk in off the street with this.
Yes, actually, we had originally proposed no carry into a restaurant of alcohol, thinking we were protecting the business owners from, competition kind of thing. And Verona's was there, and they said, no, if we don't want that, we'll post a sign, but we want people to come in our establishment. If they're coming in to use our bathroom, if they're coming in to say hi to a friend, we want that traffic.
Question, Mary.
Yes, ma'am.
This isn't just a blanket opening, right? I mean, this is primarily for special events, or is it
Doesn't
just
sound like it.
anytime? That's what I'm asking.
It's all the time.
Blanket district.
Okay. it's just-
Yes.
Monday through Saturday.
Right, and even El Dorado, they don't have it all the time, and I could read it for you. I haven't checked into Mountain Home, I'm not sure about, because they were the first one to pass this.
Well-
But I just quickly looked up El Dorado's rules, and they have
Yeah.
a lot more rules than
Well,
Little Rock.
again, we had other rules in mind, and we had more restrictive rules. We were thinking like from 5 o'clock Friday to, through Saturday evening, but we basically went by Chief Harrison's recommendation on the hours. He felt like if the hours that alcohol was for sale, that would make it much easier to know, if the officers are not going to have, okay, well, what time is it? I don't know. He recommended that, and we leaned heavily on him for the hours.
How would the city go about designating the area? This said right here with El Dorado, the district will be designated streets with red crosswalks outlined in white to make sure people know how they can go with their alcohol. They will also be available on the district app for visitors. And so when you...
There would be signs. One thing we talked about was posting signs at the corners of the boundaries that posted the hours and saying you're entering an entertainment district.
How many signs do you think that will take?
Well, we talked about 5 signs because,
Outer boundaries.
between 5 and 9 signs, actually. You probably have to get out on the ground to see in some places where they would be. But the Public Works Director would govern how the district was
I did notice too, that in the ordinance where signs will be posted, because certainly you've got to define the boundaries of the district. So my question was, where would those signs be posted? Are we going to put them on current post? We're going to make new signs, or what was the thought process?
We'll make new signage for it.
New poles, you're talking about new poles?
New poles.
On the sidewalks.
Right, exactly. And I'll place them at every intersection within the boundary. We'll make sure this is very, very clearly marked, so there's absolutely no question about it, about where the boundary is.
So what would the sign,
That design has not been come up with, but it'll post
Just to-
what the entertainment district is,
No,
the times.
the hours,
Right,
what's
that sort of
permitted?
thing.
And
Yes.
And who's responsible for, I know like for restaurants, they can only serve, so much liquor, and then it is their responsibility if they've served too much. Who's responsible for that once they leave the premises of the restaurant?
Once they leave the premises of the restaurant.
I guess it would be our police.
Right, yes,
That will
ma'am.
have to have more of a presence downtown.
That would be up to our city manager and chief. I don't really have a say in that.
And when you call underage drinking, would it be like 20?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, and I understand your concern, and I get that, but, I mean, we know right here in Texarkana that people are gonna go to a restaurant and have a few drinks, then they're gonna go to Fat Jack's and drink, and then they're gonna go to another place that stuff may stay open until 2. So, just because they leave one place, that person doesn't have to call ahead and say, well, they've had 7 drinks, I mean, Chief Harrison, I mean, your guys are trained to patrol the streets anyway. These would be no different when they leave, correct? Exactly.
pardon, I'm sorry, what did he
Said
say?
if they're not intoxicated and driving, they're not violating the law.
Okay, thank you.
And what kind of container, I'm sorry, are we talking about? Just nothing glass?
Right.
Right. People can have alcohol in any kind of container as long as it's not glass. We don't want any, that was one of the first things that the Historic District Commission, they felt like glass would be a hazard,
Yes.
Trash is a hazard.
whether it's a bottle or a glass, so.
I don't know about the others, but I think as much time has been given to this other topic that's been occupying our thoughts, I would really like the possibility of having a workshop to discuss these questions and hash these out so that I would feel more comfortable and not, that the time and attention that this deserves. And I don't know about you all, if you all would be open to a workshop or not on this.
I would be open to a workshop. I mean, there's nothing that says we certainly don't have to read the ordinance 3 times tonight. It can actually get pushed back to 3 different meetings, so it could be September before it's approved to allow more input from the public if that's the board's desire.
I'm not ready.
Yeah, there's no rush.
No, there's no
I
rush.
am not
So
ready.
you're saying if there's a possibility we could have a workshop on this?
I have no problems with that. I would think it would be important if we're going to have a workshop to include the planning commission, the ones that actually came up with the ordinance and that did all the input.
I think the planning commission has done, like I said, it's been about a 4 or 5 month process. You've been meeting on a regular basis and taking calls.
Yes, we've been talking about this since April, and we leaned very heavily on, like I said, we had a different idea of some things, and the business owners, we figured the main purpose of this is to support the business owners, and we kind of listened to them. We really listened to them.
So what we can do from here is, certainly we can have it read as first reading tonight. Then when that vote is over, we could instruct Ms. Beck to get with Boots and the Planning Commission and set some possible dates that Heather could forward out to us for a future workshop in the next few weeks or a couple of weeks or whatever, if that's permissible with the board. Just to give us a couple of dates to coordinate with the Planning Commission when we could have an open workshop. Okay? Any other discussion before we ask for, or have it read in its first reading?
Thank you, Ms. Beck.
I'm
Yes,
just,
so thank you.
want to not read it in its abbreviated form.
Okay, you want it read in its
No,
abbreviated?
I
You
want to
don't?
read it out.
You want to read it entirely?
Yes,
All right.
entirely.
All right, so.
Second.
All right, so we're going to have the ordinance read in its entirety.
An ordinance to add to the City of Texarkana, Arkansas Code of Ordinances, Chapter 28, Article 6, Section 28-82, supplement provisions, and to amend Article 11, Section 28-142, definitions to include entertainment district as a land use and for other purposes. Whereas the city desires to provide opportunities for increased cultural activities, and the state of Arkansas has provided for an opportunity to establish entertainment districts. And whereas the Planning Commission, after 4 workshops and a public hearing, have solicited and considered input from the Texarkana Police Department, the Historic District Commission, Main Street, downtown business owners and property owners, and the public at large, concluded that there is wide support for formation of an entertainment district. And whereas the Planning Commission does certify to recommend addition of an entertainment district defined and described as listed below to the City of Texarkana, Arkansas Code of Ordinances. Article 6, Section 28-82, Supplemental Provisions, Entertainment District. An entertainment district may be established to allow open container consumption of alcohol subject to the following conditions. The area of an entertainment district must have an established entertainment venues and operating restaurants. Set boundaries and hours are to be enumerated for any district established, and signage posted with hours allowed for open consumption. Nothing in these regulations shall in any way conflict or exceed the limits of Arkansas state statutes governing alcohol regulation, including no open containers may be carried out from liquor stores, and underage drinking should not be permitted. No glass containers for any liquid shall be allowed in the entertainment district during event hours that mirror state law hours of alcohol service of Sunday 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. and Monday through Saturday 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. At the city manager's discretion or his assignee, typically the public works director, part or all of the entertainment district may be closed to through traffic for street dances, music acts, art exhibits, and other cultural events or promotions. Article 11, Section 28-142. An entertainment district with specific boundaries is an area where entertainment venues and restaurants serving alcohol are located. During the hours of operation of the entertainment district as set by the city, alcohol may be consumed in open containers outdoors, but subject to all state of Arkansas statutes as well as local ordinances that otherwise apply. The boundaries of the district shown on the attached map range from State Line Avenue at 5th Street west to Walnut Street, south on Walnut Street to 3rd Street, then east along 3rd Street to Ash Street, and from there south on Ash Street to Broad Street, then west on Broad Street to Hazel Street, and turning south at Hazel Street. Hazel Street curves and merges into Front Street. West on Front Street to the east side of Pine Street, then north along the east side of Pine Street where it merges into State Line Avenue, and north from there to the point of beginning at 5th Street, boundary map attached. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Directors of the City of Texarkana, Arkansas, that these regulations are hereby adopted and incorporated into the City of Texarkana, Arkansas Code of Ordinances, passed and approved this 5th day of August 2019.
So the ordinance has been read in its entirety in its first reading. So prior to asking for a motion to have it read on its second reading tonight, is there anyone here in the audience that wishes to speak for or against this ordinance?
I just have one question. It was said Laurel Street, and now it's reading Ash Street. Is that, we have to make that change. Okay.
Thank you.
Question.
Okay.
Is it that a house, what's it say if it's a house in that boundary? Is it in houses, homes in that boundary?
I can't answer that right off the top of my head. Do you know if there's any homes in there, Ms. Beck? Any residences in this boundaries?
Could you pull up that map again real quick? I have questions about one home.
And the reason why I'm getting it, what if they decide to have some alcohol, they want to go out in their yard, to go out in the street. and-
That's not illegal anyway, is it?
Well, what if they go out in the street with some alcohol? How would that
Be good. Two requirements. They'll be in a cup, wouldn't be glass.
Okay.
They wasn't drunk.
We go in our yards right now.
Now, the residential, you see this gold color structure here? These are homes. So there aren't any homes located in this area. These, the purple are commercial buildings and the red are public buildings.
Which
So-
businesses are the homes by, do you know?
Ma'am,
Which businesses are the homes by?
I'm sorry, could you,
Which businesses are those homes by that you, in that?
oh, right here?
Bring it forward.
Okay.
Talk about Berman Forest. That area's
Johnny B.
I think that's, yeah, here's Berman Far. It's before you get to Berman Far. So there's a greenhouse here. I'm not sure what those homes right there are. This is that little photography shop. This is the Salvation Army. So this is across the street from us where the Metro Supply Plumbing is and the antique shop that's closed. This is Commercial Bank. So these are all commercial. That little orange right there, that's a house that's burned down, so it's no longer there. That's planned for a patio for the Paragon Lounge when it opens. So-
Any other
Yeah.
questions for Ms. Beck? Okay, I would entertain a motion to have the ordinance read on its second reading tonight. I hear a motion for a second reading. So the ordinance fails for a second reading, so the ordinance will be moved forward to the August 19th board meeting for potentially a second reading. And in the meantime, Boots, if y'all would just get with the planning commission and maybe supply the board with a couple of dates, we might could have a workshop. We would appreciate that.
Yes.
Okay, moving right along, I don't know of any other business on the agenda. We'll move into citizens' communication time. I do have one request that